Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, The Last Resort. Let's watch.
Right now, I'm upset. I feel embarrassed because why did I have to take the therapist to tell my lady to come sit next to me while all the couples were sitting next to each other? And I'm just disappointed. It hurt.
Yeah, that's a very mature, healthy response to that. I don't know the foundation of this relationship. I've never watched this couple before, but I will commend the way that he's talking. You know, I'm always talking about how the foundation of a lot of our negative or intense emotional relational experiences have to do with fear and hurt. And he is expressing a lot of hurt. And if we can communicate that, and at the very least, if we can recognize it in ourselves without being hostile or accusatory to others, or by pointing out within reason, you know, he said, the reason why I feel this way is because she didn't even want to sit next to me. You know, there's a different even way that he could have said it. He'd be like, that was bullcrap. She didn't even sit next to me, right? That's a different way of saying it. There's also, it also illuminates a different way of thinking about it, right? Whereas what he did, and I want to rewind this because this is actually important. We don't see this kind of healthy emotional expression. It's genuine. He's hurt. He's spontaneous. He seems like he's about to cry. He is, you know, expressing disappointment, sadness. He's pointing out what happened, but he's not being hostile. I would hope that if she were there or she saw this, that she would feel bad. She could have her reasons. She could say, well, I did it because of this, but if we're going to be in a relationship, I don't want you to feel that way. Or I could have communicated it differently. It almost seems like he was surprised by a lot of things that were said. So maybe that's another part of it. It's like, you could have told me earlier. You didn't have to do it in front of everyone and the cameras. I thought that we were better than, I thought we were doing better than that.
I feel embarrassed because why did I have to take the therapist to tell my lady to come sit next to me while all the couples were sitting next to each other? And I'm just disappointed. It hurt.
Yeah, and even the fact that he could say that he's embarrassed, that's an even more vulnerable thing for some people than saying that you're hurt, right? To say that you feel humiliated. You know, think about Angela and her seeming humiliation trauma and how seemingly impossible it is to imagine that she would say that sort of thing in that way. I mean, we've watched a lot of footage of her, so I'm not going to say that's never happened on camera. And certainly, you know, who knows what happens off camera, but we can, you know, I think Angela's issues go deeper, or she hasn't recovered, or even she's gone down more destructive roads by choice to some extent. But for him, or however he got here, you know, that's healthy for him to be able to admit. We get embarrassed all the time. And the more embarrassed, I'll just speak for myself, the more insecure that I've been in my life, particularly when I was younger, but even in moments of insecurity in my current life, the more insecure I am and the less differentiated I am, the more likely I am to, one, obscure my embarrassment or humiliation to others because I don't want to compound my humiliation by admitting that I'm humiliated, because that shows that I care or that I agree that I was humiliated or something. But I might even obscure it to myself because it's intolerable even for myself to recognize. And so I'd just be, who cares? I can blow that off. And when I gain more competence and confidence and differentiation, I'm much more able to say I was humiliated or I was embarrassed. I'm probably more likely to say I was embarrassed because I can't remember the last time I felt like someone humiliated me. That's a particular kind of thing. But embarrassment happens all the time. I just got done recording the 15th anniversary live show on YouTube, 15 hour. By the way, if you're wanting to rewatch it, it's such a shaggy recording because it's off the cuff. My brain starts to go bad after a certain amount of time. It's embarrassing. You know, if it's live, it's one thing, right? It's sort of like if you ever go to a live comedy show and you're just like on the floor laughing, but you watch it on a small screen and it just doesn't have the impact. It's the same way with a live show. If you're live, you sort of accommodate the shagginess, the hiccups of the performance or the presentation. But if you're watching a recording of it, it's bothersome, and I'm too much of a perfectionist to have that out there. So I'm going to be editing it and releasing it later. By the way, I'm talking about the 15th anniversary live show that I recorded in September of 2023. So if you're watching this at some other point, it's sort of irrelevant. And I'm going to only make it available to members and patrons. Did I say that? That's the thing, because I don't know, just putting it out there in the whole world. It might take me a while to edit it, though, because it's 15 hours, and I want to kind of go through it to make sure that everything is presentable. But I was embarrassed. That's embarrassing. So I can admit that. I can say it's embarrassing, instead of saying something like, well, I took it down because I felt like it, or just not even doing it altogether, right? Or saying like, it wasn't embarrassing, I'm perfect, or I'm an alpha male, I don't have emotions. There's a lot of different available coping methods and modes available to us in our culture, and I recommend that people, at the very least in your heart, just be able to say, yeah, it was embarrassing. I'm a human being. It was embarrassing. That's one of the best things you can ever say to yourself is, I'm a human being. I guess it depends on your definition of human being, but if your definition is even close to mine, meaning that as a human being, you're going to have emotions. You're an animal, and you're not a robot or a perfect thing or some fantasy of the perfect adult or the perfect male or the perfect whatever. You're a human being, and you have. I guess when I would hope that when you say I'm a human being, you're saying I am like everyone else. I'm not better than others. If you average out all the foibles of humans, I'm one of those people who has foibles, and so I should recognize that those things happen.
So, you really have feelings for him?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm forgetting what was included in the last episode because it's been a few weeks since I watched it. But if this is new information, which I think it is to me, that is interesting and not unexpected. And I will commend Asuelu for asking that way. There's a lot of other ways he could be asking. He could be hostile or accusatory or threatening. That's often the way those questions are asked, particularly by men. He is, at least in this moment, asking in a way that is genuinely curious. I do wonder, though, if it also illuminates another part of his childishness and his trauma, his schema, and the way that he thinks of himself in the world, and particularly in relation to Kalani. You could argue that the way he asked was the way someone asks like their mom. Like a 10-year-old is noticing that her mom, there's a divorce, and the 10-year-old boy has his mom all to himself for a number of years, and then at some point she starts to date, and at some point she says that she is dating, reveals to her son that she has a serious relationship, maybe with someone that she might want to introduce him to, and the boy is asking in that way, right? Like, so what does this mean? Because there would be possibly some feelings there for the 10-year-old of some worry, some loss, at the very least, interest of like, well, who is this person? Does that mean I have to interact with them? Could be that he is asking in that way, or it wouldn't be far-flung to imagine that he would he does have the capability of being healthy and of being kind and altruistic. So, and understanding emotions. And so it could be coming from that place as well. Let's assume it's that.
I took Asuelu up on the hall pass when he cheated.
Because, to be clear, when, just imagine you're in this position, God forbid, but somehow you find yourself in Asuelu's shoes with your partner, you would be genuinely curious as to whether or not your partner had feelings for this person that they had cheated on, in addition to a lot of other feelings. And there's a lot of ways to deal with that curiosity. It's a major thing to know, because it's like, okay, well, if it was a one-time thing, then that means one thing. But if this is potentially an ongoing thing, then that means a whole other thing. You'd be curious about that. And there's a lot of competing feelings and impulses, right? There's an impulse, I'm guessing, within Asuelu to yell or to scream, accuse, to also come across like, how could you do this to me? That's understandable in some circumstances. But I don't know what's going on in his mind and in his heart, but I'm guessing those things are going on for him, and he saw through that maze and ended up expressing a very kind, curious, open, non-intimidating, non-hostile question. Do you still have feelings for him? Through difficulty, when we're in situations like this, of conflict, particularly around these kinds of issues, breaking up, questions of divorce, if you can, then it's best to kind of be in that space. Later, you might be able to express feelings or talk with your support system, talk with your therapist. But when you're actually dealing with the person in question, if you can kind of try to keep it under control, and if you start to escalate or the other person starts to escalate, take a break, do some breathing. So, I just want to commend that.
Because sexually, I've only been with Asuelu, and I just wanted to see what it was like. But once I got to know this other person better, I ended up liking the other man.
Okay, did we know that Asuelu was her first? I don't think I knew that. I mean, it's been years since I first started watching them, so it could have been in there somewhere. But I don't remember that being a part of my conceptualization. It's not a huge detail, but it's kind of a detail. I mean, it just wasn't my impression of Kalani. She seemed like she had, she had been around the block a few times, the way that people do by the time she was of age of meeting Asuelu. Yeah, I must not have known this, because that does change things. Because he comes across as naive and childish, and I'm not saying that she's naive and childish, but what I'm saying, I'm not saying naive and childishness. What I'm saying is that for Kalani, a factor in her tolerance of him, or even the choices she made, could have been related to her lack of experience. Could she, if she had more experience, would she have made different choices? Not only in the long run, but just when she met him. And the choices around birth control, or the choices around seeing him afterwards, you know what I mean? There's some questions there. I don't know. And also, there's certainly nothing shameful or wrong or unhealthy about a 20-something, because I'm pretty sure she would have been in her 20s at least, right? Maybe mid-20s when she met Asuelu. I'm sorry, I can't remember, but I'm going to take a guess and say, early mid-20s when she met Asuelu. But it's possible that she might have, because, I don't know, this is just a random thought, but for Asuelu, we know that he is childish. I'm not insulting him. I'm just saying that he, for whatever reason, his early childhood, the traumas he went through, we don't know much about his dad. We've seen some scenes with the mom and his older sister that would concern us. I'm guessing it's much more elaborate than that. Some people have even pointed out that Polynesian men are often childized by their parents and babied and not made to grow up, whereas girls are often forced to grow up fast. And so we can add that as another possible factor. So that we know. And then you could imagine that when they met, he was even younger and had even fewer responsibilities and was even more carefree in his home country, and was possibly even more irresponsible and doesn't possess the mindset of someone that is thinking about the future. And for Kalani, she does have more maturity. We could imagine it being less back then, but to her right now, but that she did have more than him anyway. But given her inexperience, as she starts to interface with Asuelu and there's flirtation or dating, maybe some sexual activity, even though she is mature in a lot of ways, her sexual identity development or the understand, it's a well understood phenomenon that when people, if they don't have proper education and planning ahead of time, even though intellectually they know they should use birth control or they should make this other choice, there's so many other things that will eclipse those faint voices in their mind. That's why we need to prepare children and teenagers with a lot of education and a lot of conversation, not just yammering at them, but getting them to think about these things. And that's what I would do when I was in charge of sex ed for teenagers, was partially didactic, just giving them information, but really what engaged them and what they seem to want to talk about way more often, because there's dozens of diseases that you can get from various contact with people, and there's anatomy labels that are, I guess, mildly interesting, but what they really wanted to talk about was, how do you make choices and what does it mean? Is it okay to do this, and when should I be doing this? And there's no answers to that really, but they're very important questions that a lot of teenagers have no opportunity to talk about in a mature fashion. It's all online and 4chan ridiculousness or something. Does 4chan still exist? I hope not. Anyway, and so we could imagine that for Kalani, she might have, who knows, maybe she really was on the ball with that, but given her inexperience, she might have headed into that interfacing with Asuelu with a very childish, teen-like mindset and made choices that led to this.
So, I don't know.
This is so painful.
I'll also say, I keep chiming in, that I've worked with couples in this situation. This is recoverable. It might look like it's doomed, not only because she might be falling in love with someone else and he's cheated, but also just the ongoing nature of their relationship and what seems to be when we checked in with them before in a previous, maybe it was what's the series of 90 Day Fiancé? There's The Other Way, and then there's, oh my God, what's the after, Happily Ever After? Okay, I got there. And I think that's the last time we saw them, and that was a long time ago. Then the way that they talked, especially her, gave me hope a little bit. Now, this season, the way she's talking, it seems like beyond a threshold that we didn't see before. That does not mean that they're done, though. I've worked with couples who have been in this state for 5-10 years and, are really at the brink of breaking up and have been talking about divorce amongst themselves for 10 years, and there's still a chance. I'm not saying that has to do with anything to do with me necessarily. It has to do with choices you make. You can rebuild but you gotta want to in your heart. I was just talking with someone in my personal life about this, that it's all about what's in your heart. And I've had those conversations with clients. We tend to think like, well, how will I know, the way that Whitney Houston said, or when should I make the choice to divorce? There are a lot of things to explore. There are a lot of questions to consider. There are a lot of things that I would ask clients as a way of trying to guide their decision around this. But I've seen clients where they answer all the questions in the negative, meaning they want a divorce. And even I am looking at it thinking, yeah, it looks like the best choice is to divorce. I'm saying that in my head. I would never say that out loud. I also know I have no idea because I don't. But I might entertain a thought of like, well, if I were in their shoes, yeah, there's not a lot of hope there. But I always caveat that in my mind of just like, but there's some hope. Meaning to say that there's not a lot of hope means there is some hope. There's always some hope, depending. And so even when I hear that from clients, I will still see clients make the choice from their heart of, but I want to try. I feel like there's still a try in me. There's some trying in me. There's some motivation in me, some hope in me. And for some of those people, they turn it around. It takes a long time, but they will. So I want to point that out, not only for this landscape, but for all y'all out there. I feel like people are going to therapy more and more these days, but I don't know if people are going to couple therapy as much as they should be. In fact, I would say that 98% of couples should be occasionally going to couple therapy. I have a friend, two friends of mine who are married who go to couple therapy just occasionally, every 6 months or something for a few sessions out of routine, because even though there's no desperation to do that, it's a wonderful place to work things out. There's always something to work out is the thing. There's always something to talk about. And for some couples, there's a lot of things to talk about.
I'm really mad and upset. And
But why? Like, what is the difference?
you still want to talk to him.
So you think it's okay what you did because you never kept a connection with them? Is that what you're saying?
Okay, now we're getting kind of an odd conversation. He's upset, okay, and he's expressing it. I think a lot of viewers, including Kalani, would say, well, you don't have the right to be upset. That doesn't make any sense. If I were a little birdie on her shoulder, I would say to her, slow down, don't get into an argument or tit for tat or like, but you did. Just reckon with what the situation is, because something's got to give. You either have to break up with a Swelu and continue with this relationship, or you have to try to be with a Swelu and commit yourself to cutting off this relationship with the other person, or you have to try to introduce the ideas of polyamory, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this moment, but it's an option. Or you've got to break up with both and move on by yourself. So where are you? Because that is a question, and a Swelu deserves to know where you're at with that. There's a lot of things Kalani deserves as well, but to get into this, tit for tat of just like, well, but it's a very relevant question that he's essentially raising.
I only slept with you before him. You realize, right?
I understand that.
So yes, it's a big deal for me to sleep with somebody else that's not my husband. So I've had to keep a connection with him, yes.
I feel like this is my chance to prove it to you. But after that, you still want to go hang out with him. You still want to see him. That's why I'm being crazy. Yeah.
It's a relevant question. Whatever you think of a Swelu, it's important to know. I mean, at the very least, it's an important detail that they both need to know what her answer is to that. Everything hinges on that, right? So, and maybe it'll take her time. She's been through a lot this evening. They just revealed it. She just revealed it. And there's a lot of things happening. So, this whole process of conversations could take months to iron out.
Idea to give her a pass, but Kalani still texting to the other guy. And I want her to stop doing that and let's just start fresh. I'm so sorry that I hurt you.
I don't want to keep hearing, I'm so sorry.
What do you want me to do?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about apologies, and I've done a whole deep dive on it. Sometimes people will say, but I don't like it when people just apologize. I think some of the times what that is in reaction to is that for some people, they're like a Swelu where they just keep committing the behavior and they say the words, but they're not really sorry. They're not really remorseful. And I'm guessing that that's what Kalani is perceiving. He's saying he's sorry and he's being nice about it. We've seen with Big Ed, he would do the same thing. He would say, I'm sorry, and he might even appear to be. So there's a difference between apologizing as a nice person. You're being nice. You're getting a nice apology and a remorseful apology. Remorseful apologies can be nice, but nice apologies do not necessarily mean the person is actually remorseful. And there's a huge difference. Whenever you're thinking of apologies, think of remorse. Sorry, sorrowful, sorrow, sorry. You feel sorrow. The individual that committed the transgression feels sorry, sorrow, remorse in their heart, independent of what anyone else says. They're just like, once they realize the harm that they caused, it hurts them. Like, oh, I feel sorrow. I feel sorry. Think about that. Being apologetic and being sorry is not saying in a nice tone, I'm sorry that I did that. That's not I mean, unless you really are remorseful and are communicating that, particularly in a situation like this, then it's not really an apology, and according to my definition. So, and it's certainly not going to land well with other people, particularly if you keep doing it over and over again. If you truly are sorry and you truly have remorse, you're, one, much more likely to get at least an acceptance or maybe a movement towards forgiveness, or maybe forgiveness from the transgressed upon person. But you're also less likely to do it in the future. That's the key. That's why apologies are necessary. It's not just an apology. I'm sorry. It's the whole system. When you're apologizing, you're getting an apology. It involves the past in terms of the transgressions. It might even involve dozens or hundreds of transgressions in that category that the person is apologizing for, sort of. They're apologizing for one incident, but they're also kind of apologizing for all the things they've done in that category. It's also a thing about the present of like, I'm here with you. It's also a thing about the future. I'm sorry, and I do not want this to happen again. And here is what I have done to actually address that. Because not only do I not want to hurt you, but I don't want to feel remorse. I don't want to feel sorrow because of what I do to other people. I want to avoid that. So it's the whole thing. And so just being kind and being nice and saying I'm sorry is, it's far from that. It could be that, but it's so much more than that. So I'm guessing that Kalani has rarely or never actually had Asuelu convincingly communicate that he feels sorrow and remorse. And I think if that is true, then it's an outcome of his seeming schema of dependency and of childishness and maybe passive aggression. Some sort of schema that he doesn't matter enough to actually be on the level of other people.
I came back and I'm changed. But now I see like you guys have sex.
Yeah.
And it's really painful because I don't...
Because what? Why is it painful?
Because the kiss and...
You got your... What is the difference?
He can get you pregnant though.
What the does that have to...
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I was wondering... Oh, that's an unfortunate... I should skip forward a little bit. There we go.
Do with anything.
There we go. So I was wondering, as he is saying these things, and I've been kind of alluding to it, that it's totally normal and healthy that he is hurt and worried about this other person, this man, and Kalani's relationship with him. And he can talk about it. He can talk about his feelings. He can even say, hey, I don't want you to be with him. And Kalani can say, well, I do want to be with this other guy, so I guess that means we have to divorce or something like that. Or I need time to figure it out or something. She can say a lot. He can say a lot of, Asuelu can say a lot of things. If anything, if Kalani wants to know that this relationship might work out, Kalani presumably would want her husband to want Kalani to only be with Asuelu if they're in a monogamous relationship, which they are. I mean, they value monogamy, meaning as opposed to polyamory. Anyway, so, and to be clear, that's not polyamory. You don't, in polyamorous relationships, you don't just do things without having an agreement beforehand, a very extensive agreement. With polyamorous couples that I would talk to, they would go line by line. It's almost like a legal agreement of like, okay, well, if you're in this situation with this sort of person, you can go to second base, but kind of halfway to third. But, there's a lot of stipulations because that's the healthy thing to do. Now, sometimes the polyamorous couples are just like, yeah, you're free to do X amount of things with this sort of group of people when you're in this situation. I don't need to know about every instance. Anyway, point is they're a monogamous relationship. So I was wondering for him if he was expressing that and, it was just like part of the healthier, bigger conversation that they're going to have. But then he says that, meaning that there's a double standard and he's just looking for something to grab onto. Well, he can get you pregnant. Yeah, I mean, I guess that is a concern, but presumably Kalani took precautions, who knows? But it sounds like a convenient excuse for him to blame her for the problem while completely distancing himself from his own infidelity, which I think has happened more than once. And he was the one that started it. I mean, not that two wrongs make a right necessarily, but, well, what she did wasn't a wrong because he literally said she could get together with someone, and she did. So she didn't cheat at all. I'm sure Asuelu didn't intend on this backfiring for him, which it seems to have done. I'm worried about both of them, honestly. You know, you might look at Kalani and say, like, oh, maybe she's on her way out. This is good. There's so many things that I think Kalani avoids and is struggling with that she distances herself. You know, I don't know, maybe behind the scenes she's very self-aware, or she doesn't have a lot of issues. I don't know. But given what we're seeing here, there's a lot of people, the red flags that I'm sensing is that for Kalani, we're now learning that she was inexperienced, I think, is what she's saying, before having met Asuelu, got pregnant right away, which is, Kalani's smart. I'm sure she understands frontwards and backwards birth control and family planning. I don't know if we heard an explicit conversation about how they made that choice, or if they did, and it, because sometimes it doesn't work. But anyway, I'm not going to shame that, but it is. I'm guessing if Kalani could go back in time, she would whisper in her ear, "Have him wear a condom." Right? Well, wasn't there a whole? It's been a while. Wasn't he just like, I don't like the way they feel or something? Anyway, so for Kalani, the worries I have are sort of mounting, not only just all that, but then her relationship with Asuelu. She can't be blamed for a lot of things seemingly from the edit, but in the beginning, the way that she would talk down to him, the sort of over-functioning or superiority. Now, Asuelu has proven himself to provoke that. I'm sure if I were hanging out, or if I were in a relationship with Asuelu, he would provoke that urge in me at times for sure. But in all likelihood, so I'm saying that in the future with Kalani, there's a chance that she will have this dynamic if she doesn't work on herself. And what's interesting is that people in Kalani's shoes can be in the over-functioning, like say the next relationship that Kalani is in, there's a risk of her being in the over-functioning, but there's also a risk of her being in the under-functioning, because it's a model of relationship that was embedded in her, or the issues were such that it creates this. Anyway, I'm babbling. The other red flag that I have here is that there's a pretty good chance that Kalani really wanted to leave Asuelu a long time ago, but just couldn't get the nerve up to do it, or couldn't value herself well enough or something. And then when she had this hall pass, she took him up on it, met this other man, and started to have feelings for him. And if this ends up the reason why they broke up, and she begins another relationship with this other guy, she will still have this issue of not really valuing herself, not knowing what she wants, not in a differentiated way, really thinking about it. I don't know, but the way that it looks, on the scale of differentiation, a higher differentiated individual, and it's hard to stay differentiated in life in general, but it's even harder in a situation like this. But a more differentiated person would have, taken some time before the hall pass, honestly, and said, okay, what's going on here? How do I feel? I'm angry at him. I'm hurt. I want to take him up on this hall pass thing, but big picture, that really isn't what's best for me. I really have to evaluate and answer the question, do I want to be with Asuelu? Because if she wanted to be with Asuelu, if 51% of her wanted to be with Asuelu, then she probably shouldn't take the hall pass for a variety of reasons. She could, and he said go for it, but if she's really wanting to salvage the relationship and recover from the infidelity that he committed, if she really wants to get Asuelu to grow up or figure out his own issues or recover from his own traumas, there's a path forward along those lines. Or if she was very on the fence, if not 51% wanting to leave Asuelu at that point, which I can imagine being true, then also she, a differentiated individual, at least for me, if I were in those shoes, I would conclude, look, the hall pass, the issue is here is I'm done. And let's just begin the breakup process, and I can have as many hall passes, so to speak, as I want. And I won't be muddying the waters. Whereas less differentiated people will bounce from relationship to relationship, sometimes in this manner, where there will be infidelity that will just overlap all the relationships. Sometimes it's like flat out infidelity, and she didn't cheat. But you know what I'm saying? For many people, though, it's not actually having physical contact, but emotional infidelity will begin well before they actually begin the breakup process. And they just go from relationship to relationship to relationship. There's nothing pathological about that. I hate it. I've probably said before that I hate it when people pathologize that, like they're always in a relationship. You know, it could be a problem, but it isn't necessarily a problem. But I do worry about Kalani because I guess the main point is that if we could really sit her down and give her a lot of time and maybe a lot of therapy prior to the hall pass, but after the infidelity that he committed, and really get her to fully have the freedom to think and to have options and to explore herself, know that she matters, know that she has agency, know that she can survive without him, know that she will likely find another partner in the future who will probably be more compatible for her than Asuelu, probably. Well, that's another factor I didn't think of is that if for Kalani, Asuelu was her first, then she might not know if anyone else will love her. You know, that's a question. You know, maybe there's some trauma for her around that. I don't know. It's all speculation. But if we could really sit her down, I wonder what she would have said. There's a good chance she would have been like, yeah, I think I'm done. Or maybe there's one last little thing I want to do, one more bout of therapy, maybe even going on the show or something. And then I would say, okay, so you're done. Do you still want to do this hall pass thing? You know, what do you think the outcome will be from that? And that would be another litmus test question, because, you know, if someone said to me in Kalani's position, well, I still want to do the hall pass thing, then I say, oh, okay, well, you certainly have permission from your partner to do that. What's the outcome you're looking for? And if it's something like, well, I just want to find out what it's like to be with someone else. Okay. Yeah. And that's what she said. Right. And, so are you saying in the purpose of contrasting him, you know, this other person with Asuelu? That's interesting. I think I'm convincing myself that she might be, wise about that. Because she had permission, and if she was inexperienced, she might, not just sexually, but in terms of that sort of romantic sexual relationship, she might benefit from having that's why you date. That's why before you get married and have kids, not for everybody, but it can help to have some examples of relationships so you can compare and contrast. You know, that's what I did. My parents didn't. They've been married for 60 years. And my dad apparently sort of dated someone or a couple women and girls in high school. They met in high school and got pregnant shortly after on accident with my older brother. But my mom did not have any relationships. I think she, you know, went to the soda shop, or what do you call it? The malt shop or whatever, that kind of thing with a couple guys, but I don't think there was any sort of kissing or any kind of deep involvement anyway. And they managed for 6 years. So what do I know? But, I don't know. That's just my reaction to all this. All right. Well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.